Welcome. This lecture addresses the topic of injunctions, a critical component of tort law under Unit 4. We will examine the legal mechanism by which a court can order a party to either perform a specific act or refrain from performing it. This remedy is fundamental to the principle of preventive justice within our legal system. Our discussion will proceed according to the following agenda. First, an introduction to the concept of injunctions. Second, the classification of injunctions. Third, we will analyze the principles governing temporary injunctions. Fourth, the practical application of mandatory injunctions. Fifth, the statutory grounds for refusal of an injunction. We will conclude with a summary for examination purposes.
We will begin with the first section, an introduction to injunctions, covering their definition, legal nature, and statutory foundation.
An injunction is defined as a judicial process whereby a party is required to do or refrain from doing a particular thing. Its nature is that of a preventive relief. The governing statute is the Specific Relief Act of 1963, specifically Sections 36 and 37. The core purpose of an injunction is not to compensate for a wrong that has already occurred, but rather to prevent a potential or ongoing wrong from happening or continuing. It is a direct and coercive order from the court, enforcing a legal right before it is irreparably damaged. Let us now proceed to the second section, which deals with the classification of injunctions. It is essential to understand the distinct categories of injunctive relief available under the law. The Specific Relief Act classifies injunctions based on two primary criteria. First, classification by duration. This includes temporary injunctions, which remain in force until a specified time or until further order of the court, and are regulated by the Code of Civil Procedure 1908. In contrast, perpetual injunctions are granted by a final decree after the court has heard the merits of the case. Second, classification by nature. This includes prohibitory injunctions, which forbid a defendant from committing a wrongful act, and mandatory injunctions, which compel a defendant to perform an act to restore a prior state of affairs. We will now examine the principles governing the grant of temporary injunctions. A court does not grant such relief automatically. The applicant must satisfy a stringent three-pronged legal test. To secure a temporary injunction, the plaintiff must establish three essential conditions. First, the existence of a prima facie case. This requires the plaintiff to demonstrate that there is a serious question to be tried and that they have a probable chance of success in the suit. Second, the likelihood of irreparable injury. The plaintiff must show that they will suffer an injury that cannot be adequately compensated by monetary damages if the injunction is not granted. Third, the balance of convenience must be in the plaintiff's favor. The court must be satisfied that the hardship faced by the plaintiff from the refusal of the injunction would be greater than the hardship caused to the defendant by its grant. Let us examine the case of Dalpat Kumar v. Prahad Singh, reported in 1992, Volume 1 of the Supreme Court Cases, page 719. The issue before the Supreme Court was the propriety of a high court granting an injunction that a lower court had refused. The rule established is that the court must consider the conduct of the parties and the adequacy of monetary compensation. In this case, the respondent repeatedly sought injunctions after a court-executed sale had been finalized. The Supreme Court concluded by setting aside the injunction, holding that the respondent had failed to prove the existence of any irreparable injury. This case underscores that injunctive relief is discretionary and equitable, not a matter of right. In this fourth section, we will focus on mandatory injunctions. These injunctions are distinct in that they command an affirmative action, aiming to restore a situation rather than merely to prevent a future act. This table illustrates the fundamental differences between prohibitory and mandatory injunctions. A prohibitory injunction restrains or forbids an act, with the object of stopping a breach in progress, as seen in cases of environmental pollution. A mandatory injunction, conversely, directs or compels an act with the object of restoring the former state of things, such as ordering the removal of an illegal structure. These are governed by Section 38 and Section 39 of the Specific Relief Act, respectively. The former prevents a wrong, while the latter rectifies a wrong already committed. Consider the case of Crehall v. Burrell from 1877. The issue was whether a building that obstructed a right-of-way could be ordered to be removed, even at a significant cost to the defendant. The governing rule is that a mandatory injunction is appropriate to restore a former state when a breach occurs despite clear warnings. In this case, the defendant proceeded to build a structure despite repeated objections from the plaintiff. The court concluded by ordering the removal of the building, thereby establishing the principle that the high cost of compliance is not a valid defense when a defendant has acted in deliberate defiance of another's rights. Let us now consider a problem. A municipality acquires R's land for the stated purpose of creating a public park. Subsequently, the municipality attempts to sell this land to a private individual. R seeks an injunction to maintain his possession. The question is, will he succeed? The answer is yes. In the case of Raghunath versus Mathura Municipality, reported in All India Reporter 1952 Allahabad, page 465, the court held that R is entitled to a mandatory injunction. The reasoning provided by the court was that it has the power to prevent the breach of an obligation that was a condition precedent to the acquisition of the plaintiff's property. The municipality, having acquired the land for a specific public purpose, was not permitted to deviate from that purpose to the detriment of the original owner's rights. We proceed now to the fifth section, which details the circumstances under which a court is statutorily barred from granting an injunction. These limitations are explicitly outlined in the Specific Relief Act, 1963. Section 41 of the Specific Relief Act, 1963, enumerates specific grounds for the refusal of an injunction. These include to restrain a person from applying to any legislative body, to interfere with criminal proceedings, when the underlying contract cannot be specifically enforced, when the plaintiff has, through their conduct, acquiesced to the infringement of their rights, and when the plaintiff has no personal interest in the matter. These provisions ensure that the remedy of injunction is not misused and respects the separation of powers and other public policy considerations. To conclude, let us consolidate the key points from our discussion. This section is designed to serve as a revision guide for examinations. For examination purposes, you must remember the following. An injunction is a judicial process for restraint or prevention. A temporary injunction is interlocutory and regulated by the Code of Civil Procedure, whereas a perpetual injunction is granted as a final decree on the merits of the case. The grant of a temporary injunction rests upon the three pillars: a prima facie case, irreparable injury, and the balance of convenience. A prohibitory injunction forbids an act, while a mandatory injunction compels one. Key illustrative cases include Dipal Kumar, Crayhall v. Burrell, and Raghunath. The primary governing statute is the Specific Relief Act of 1963, specifically sections 36 through 42. The legal maxim, ubi jus ibi remedium, which means where there is a right, there is a remedy, finds its most effective expression in the law of injunctions. This form of preventive justice is crucial for ensuring that legal rights are not merely theoretical, but are practically maintained, and where necessary, possessions are restored. The injunction stands as a powerful testament to the court's ability to provide substantive justice by preventing harm before it becomes irreversible.